If there's one thing we can all agree on in miniature painting, it's that time is a precious commodity. It's the whole reason why this channel focuses not on bringing you my professional techniques as a commission painter, but more on my fast and dirty time-saving techniques that I use when I'm on my own time to get as much bang for my buck as possible. But Zenithal Priming might be one of the few things in miniature painting that's maybe agreed on just a little bit too much. What if I were to tell you that, in some cases, not only does Zenithal Priming waste time, but it could be hindering your results too? First of all, the obvious. The process of preparing for Zenithal Priming as a bare minimum typically involves some steps in setting up your airbrush, doing at least one cleaning stage when you switch colours and another at the end, plus the actual painting time itself. There's a minimum commitment of time here. If we're going to commit to an upfront time investment, the perceived exchange is that we'll get something out of it in return. The premise of Zenithal Priming is that it's creating free lighting information for us to later inform our painting decisions. But what if I told you that information isn't always as usable as we assume it to be? Let's look at a comparison between the model you've just seen me zenithally prime and its box art. By the way, thanks again to Corvus Belli for sending over these gorgeous Morats. They're making for some really fun videos. I'm having a great time with them. Anyway, can you see the differences here? For some it's going to be obvious from the get-go, but let's take a closer look just to be sure. Let's look again at the areas I'm about to circle. Notice how, because they face upwards, the zenithal on my model completely washes them out as almost fully white. Yet the box art painter has applied some nice volumetric blends across them. To understand this decision, we have to first understand the difference between a global volumetric highlight and a local volumetric highlight. So I made this graphic, which I actually think does most of the talking for me. Zenithal Priming creates excellent global lighting, but the issue with global lighting is that it can often require significant reworking or straight up just ignoring in order to create nice distinct boundaries between the different shapes or volumes of a miniature. Sticking with the accidental Morat theme of this video that was not intended at all when I wrote it, take a look at my work in progress on this Raicho here, which I'm painting in an interpretation of the box art. The lighting is, well, pretty unrealistic, yet it's comfortable and natural for the eye to observe. So why is this? Well, it's because the separation between the volumes creates strong punches of contrast which stand out and look appealing on the tiny shapes of a miniature, as well as adding a ton of depth. If I were to strictly obey a zenithal lighting scheme here on something like this prominent chest wedge, I'd just have a single direction of light pushing towards the front V. It might look more realistic to do this perhaps, but the impact we'd lose would be huge. And when we look at the completed studio paint scheme for the Raicho, we see local volumetrics all over the Mini, with no strong emphasis on a single global light source. And once you spot this difference, it can become really hard to unsee it, which is where I've ended up in a position now that I seldom use Zenithal Priming. But this does leave us with a couple of questions. One being, when is it a good idea to use Zenithal Priming? And two, is there a simple way to understand local volumetrics that's practical? My friend the Morat Vanguard here can answer question one very simply. It is great to use Zenithal Priming to quickly achieve volumetric highlighting on one main part of a Mini, in this case the skin, before then creating separate local highlights in other areas. It's also excellent to use Zenithal Priming in conjunction with transparent painting. I used a transparent red directly over the zenithal to inform the lighting for this skin. You can actually really see this in the side views. Any application where you want a quick sketch of overall lighting to then apply fast techniques over using transparency works amazingly well with Zenithal Priming, which is exactly what I do for my one-page rules mummified undead. It's just not always the ideal technique for creating punchy single pieces, and that's really what I'm hoping to communicate here. As a quick side note, I think it's also important not to confuse zenithal highlighting with the Marco Frazzoni style approach of pre-sketching lighting with an airbrush. They're very different things and lend themselves to different applications. Now then, on to answering that second question, and for this we once again need our friend Photoshop, and we'll start with a nice shaded cube here. We're aiming to create a simple method to understand shading localized volumes in a concise way, and fortunately that's actually very easy. If a volume faces up, it gets a bright highlight. If it faces down or is completely obscured, such as in a crack or crevice, it gets a deep shadow. Now, how we express this typically is through blending, and that's where more of the trick comes in. If we're using this graphic to understand what an upward-facing plane is and what a downward-facing plane is, all we really need to remember is that we shade toward the lowest-facing part, and we highlight toward the highest-facing part. If we know how to blend and we know up from down, we have all the knowledge we need for localized volumes. Of course, you may also want to be a bit expressive with it, and that's fine too. You can break the rules to suit yourself. Besides that, there's really only ever one golden rule, which, again, going back to our Raicho, demonstrates nicely here. Never place two light edges touching or two dark edges touching. I visualize this like a chessboard, but my brain is kind of weird, so you might not want to follow that advice. So coming to conclusion time here, my aim is not really to encourage you to make any absolute decisions based on the points I make in this video. What I'm maybe trying to encourage instead is that you look at each miniature on a case-by-case basis and learn to ask whether zenithal highlighting is right for this process, this time. We often like to take established wisdom in miniature painting as a given, and I think in order to establish individual style and expression, sometimes it's better to ask questions. So really, I just hope that the next time you grab your airbrush to do the black and white thing, you'll ask yourself, is this right for me in this particular case? And if you enjoyed this video, please do remember to give it a like and maybe consider subscribing to the channel so that you can see more like it. If you really love the content and want to support it directly, there are also links below to my Patreon and my various affiliates. So until next time, friends, I'd just like to wish you happy hobbying, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye for now.